all the dear
Good afternoon.
NSI family members.
Good afternoon.
To all the past presidents.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Prakash, Dr. Kamla Madam, Dr. Seshikaran, Dr. Kupad,
Good afternoon.
Dr. Deepak, many others are there. All the chapter conveners. Yeah, and first of all, I would like to congratulate all the chapter conveners for conducting such wonderful programs in the last 1 month. Yes, all of you conduct very good programs regularly, but now in the last 1 month, I really appreciate you. All of you have contributed so significantly. Thank you very much, and keep the flag flying high. Then in the last 5 months, 90 members have joined, life members of NSI. That's also a very great achievement. Even during the pandemic, we got 90 people who have registered. Probably, I mean, they got so motivated that they registered just in last 5 months. So let's go on to the main agenda of today. And I take this opportunity to congratulate all the awardees. Srikanta Memorial Award. Dr. Siddharth Ramji is going to speak on optimizing nutrition in low birth weight infants. Thank you very much, sir, and hearty congratulations. Then Dr. Seema Puri, who got the Dr. Seema Puri, Rajamal Devidas Award. Congratulations, madam, and wonderful. You're going to talk on mainstream nutrition from pre-conception to old age, the life course approach. Thank you very much, and hearty congratulations. Thank you.
Congrats, Seema.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Hi.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. And we have Dr. K.K. Deepak, who will be taking this. Which one?
Dr.
B.K. Anand Award. Congratulations, sir, and thank you very much. We are looking forward to hear this wonderful lectures and also remarks by Dr. Deepak. Thank you very much. So now Dr. Lakshmaya's floor.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Wait, I'll tell. So here, just to brief you all once again, now Dr. Lakshmaya will be going to read about the award, okay? Then about the recipient, that is about Dr. Siddharth Ramji, Dr. Dinesh will be reading. And after that, there will be a brief presentation of award by all of us. And then the oration lecture will start. So the oration lecture of Dr. Srikanta Memorial Award will be starting in about 10 or 15 minutes. So we require 10 or 15 minutes to perform all this award presentation and recipient. Then after that, we'll go on, move on to the next agenda. Okay? Yeah, Dr. Lakshmi.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm very happy to read about Srikanta Memorial Lecture. And the Srikanta Memorial Lecture Award was instituted in 1989 by the Nutrition Society of India to honor late Dr. Sri S.G. Srikantia, one of the founder members of the society. As a member and later its treasurer and vice president, Dr. Srikantia was instrumental in building, expanding, and consolidating the activities of the society. Dr. Srikantia was born in 1926 in illustrious family in Mysore. After his brilliant undergraduate career in Mysore Medical College, he joined the National Institute of Nutrition, then known as the Nutrition Research Laboratories, Kunur in 1951. He served the institute with rare distinction and dedication for more than 3 decades till his voluntary retirement in 1980. From 1974 to 1980, he was the director of the institute, NIN, and contributed to the growth and development of the institute. Dr. Srikantia was an internationally renowned nutrition scientist and made outstanding contributions in clinical nutrition. He was a versatile, not only expert in clinical nutrition, but also in nutritional biochemistry and public health nutrition. Under his able stewardship, the National Institute of Nutrition diversified its research activities and had a coordinated approach with added new dimension and depth of depth to nutrition research in India. A scientist with ideas, vision, initiative, drive, and he could enthuse colleagues in a gentle and persuasive manner. And his elegant studies on the role of ferritin in the pathogenesis of nutritional edema have attracted considerable attention. His pioneering research contributions were on protein energy malnutrition, PEM, vitamin A deficiency, nutritional anemias, pellagra, and fluorosis. He led the studies on prevention and control of vitamin A deficiency in the country, and he was the man behind the National Vitamin A Prophylaxis Program in India. And even after his voluntary retirement, he continued to be active research and teaching and was associated with the University of Mysore. He was a member of the editorial board of the Indian Journal of Medical Research, and he was also valued for his unbiased critical and reviewer of many journals. And Dr. Srikantaya has several publications to his credit, including book chapters, a man of simple habits, sterling qualities, upright, sincere, devoted to scientific pursuits, and loyal to the committed cause. Srikantaya was a friend, philosopher, and guide to many of junior colleagues. The Nutrition Society of India is proud to announce that the 32nd Dr. Srikantaya Memorial Lecture on optimizing nutrition in low birth weight infants will be delivered by Dr. Siddharth Ramji, Director and Professor, Head of the Neonatology and former Dean, Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi. Thank you. Yeah. About award is Siddharth Ramji. Dr. Dinesh will read out.
Sir, Namaskar, Dr. Siddharth Ramji. It gives me great pleasure on behalf of Nutrition Society at PDR to introduce the orator for the 32nd Srikantaya Oration Lecture. Professor Siddharth Ramji is a specialized in pediatrician, and he has joined the Japan for doing the technological advancement, for which he got a special awardee, which I am just mentioning in short about the whole detail. The most notable work of the Professor Siddharth has been use of room air restitution newborns in the delivery room, which has changed the good global practices in delivery room care of newborns. He has been actively involved in the development and implementation of monitoring public health system for neonatal and child health care in India. I may not like to name all the organizations, whichever is there in the government organization. He is the chairman, member, expert advisor, including the WHO, and served in various capacities. He has also served as a special officer on duty for the National Medical Council of India. He is currently extending his expertise as a chair Global Disease Burden India MCH Group. Now he is the chairman of the BIRAC program, and Professor Siddharth has over 100 research publications in index peer-reviewed journals and 35 chapters in 5 edited books. With such vast experience in his area of expertise, Professor Siddharth has definitely created this for himself. Today, he will be speaking on the topic optimizing nutrition in low birth weight infants. On behalf of the NSI, sir, it's an honor for us, and we will be happy to listen to your lecture. Thank you. Floor is open for you.
Thank you.
Award after. Okay, sir. Some formalities now we have to go about with first award, then the lectures. Okay. You are able to visualize it.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
ఇది కూడా ఒకసారి పట్టుకోండి ఫస్ట్.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank
Your
you.
floor is
All right.
open for you, sir.
So I'll share my screen first. Let me see it. So you will have to enable screen sharing for me because it says disabled. Simply enable the.
Yes, yes. You can share now.
Yeah, thank you.
Alam co-host here.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah,
You have to make it.
this presentation mode.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
We can see.
Visible now?
Can see, but it will.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lakshman.
So, good evening.
In mute, please,
Gentlemen.
except for the speaker.
First of all, I wish to profoundly thank the Nutrition Society for considering me worthy of this memorial award in the memory of Dr. Shrikantaya, who is an eminent nutritionist. This afternoon, what I decided to talk was on a subject of nutrition for low birth weights. There were several reasons why I chose that. We know that we have a huge burden of low birth weight infants. We also know that the time of birth and the first several weeks after birth is actually that key transition period from an intrauterine phase to what happens in later childhood and adulthood. And we are now quite aware that a lot of things that happen in terms of nutrition in early childhood impacts adult chronic diseases like obesity and cardiovascular diseases. So I do not propose today to talk about the maternal factors. I think that's a very challenging exercise about the role of maternal nutrition and the occurrence of low birth weight prematurity. I'm also not going to talk about what happens beyond infancy, but I will try and concentrate about our practices for feeding newborns, particularly low birth weights, and see how they relate to what possibly happens into adulthood. To bring this into context, I think we need to understand where are we with related to low birth weight. The burden of low birth weight globally is maybe about 15%. But as you can clearly see here, South Asia is the key contributor to the major burden of low birth weight. This region has close to 30% of babies being born low birth weight. And India today has a figure somewhere between 20 to 25%. But we also need to remember that low birth weights are not a homogeneous group. They're made up of many phenotypes, partly based on gestation and partly on the intrauterine growth status. And if you look at preterms, we have the very preterms who are less than 32 weeks. And then we have the moderate preterms of between 32 to 36 weeks, who actually constitute the largest chunk. India has reported rates of prematurity ranging from 8 to 12%. And surprisingly, not only in India, but globally, the proportion of very preterm babies have for some reason been very constant at about 1/6 of this total preterm burden. But if you look at preterms further, based on the intrauterine growth state, they could either be appropriately grown babies or small for gestation. These proportions keep changing, but approximately, I think in India, about a third of babies, maybe even close to 40% of preterm babies are actually growth restricted. And then, of course, we have another 50 to 55% of low birth weights who are term babies or growth restricted. So when we talk about nutrition for these babies, it's a potpourri of mixture of 5 to 6 phenotypes. It has not been easy to dissect it because most studies haven't done that too elegantly. But I'll try during the course of this talk to see how we can dissect out these phenotypes. There are 3 issues which I wish to address in this talk. One is the contribution of these low birth weights to later childhood undernutrition. The second is the problem of extra-uterine growth retardation, which actually is that the babies are at lower centiles than what they were born with, and usually are at, based on the definitions people have used, either below -2 SD or below the 10th centile of their 36th week of post-conceptual gestation. And of course, the third element is that in our attempt to improve their growth and create an accelerated growth, what are we doing? How is it impacting adult chronic disease? So let me begin by looking at their contribution to childhood growth. Bob Black and his group for many years have been looking at this issue, and they summarized this very recently. And you can clearly see they've used three phenotypes here. They've used the preterm appropriately grown. They have the term small for gestation and the preterm small for gestation. And you can clearly see that as you go up from AGA preterm to preterm SGA, both for stunting and for wasting at 24 months, the worst affected are the group of babies who doubly jeopardized, who are both preterm and small for gestation. If you look at the various regions where the problem is there, of course, while these problems seem to be much more in Latin America, however, remember that in view of the sheer burden of low birth weights and growth restricted babies that we have in this part of the world, our contributions would be immense in terms of what's going to happen. So clearly, when you look at estimates of undernutrition in terms of stunting and wasting, and we look at what we can do in terms of interventions, we must remember that much has already happened during the several months that fetus has been in utero, and probably what we do ex utero is not going to change things substantially, other than probably making it worse for us as adults. The second issue is that of extra-uterine growth retardation. As I said, that many people have used different definitions, and based on the definitions they've used and the proportion of growth restricted babies at birth, these figures have been reported variably to run from 40% to as high as 90%. And if you look at the as a median figure, you will realize that if you look at 28 days after life, almost half of the babies don't achieve the centiles at which they were born. And this number goes up to maybe comes down a bit, but those who fall below -2 actually go up. So eventually you may have about only 1/3 of babies who generally would go home keeping close to their birth centiles. And this is for weight. Head circumference much better, almost half of them do better, and a similar story is seen for length. So the issue is that we have created a scenario where we believe that this extra-uterine growth restriction is like a pathological phenomenon. And we need to understand whether that actually is true or not. But we also need to understand what all this extra-uterine growth retardation does. Most of the reasons for this extra-uterine growth retardation is clearly our inability to provide optimal nutrition to the baby in the first week of life. It's very clear. This data clearly suggests that non-UGRs tended to have a better energy intake, better protein intake. And that's very clear that here's a baby who has been deprived of the intrauterine growth status, having been born early, and we have feeding challenges in trying to meet their needs. And so there's bound to be a phase where these babies lose weight and then take longer to catch up. And they may not catch up for a very long time. And so one reason is nutrition. But that's not the only reason. In fact, probably the highest adjusted odds is if you were born an SGA yourself, whether it's term SGA or a preterm SGA. But the only thing is that this analysis clearly shows that the 95% CI is a rather wide. But notwithstanding that, it's clear that SGA itself is a risk factor. And so you're likely to go home at the time of discharge from hospitals at lower centiles. And we clearly also see that all the other items related to feeding, because of the feeding policies, traditionally very low birth weights have been starved enterally. Feedings have been initiated later, so it's taken us longer to achieve full complement of enteral feeding. And obviously, when you give them less feeds, there is a huge protein deficit. And the net result is all this has some contribution to the causation of this rather slower growth that takes place after the first few weeks of life. Does it impact neurodevelopment? And this little elegant study that was published last year shows that all babies who had extrauterine growth restriction by the traditional anthropometric definition that we're using have lower cognition, poorer language scores, and poor motor composite scores at 2 years. Of course, cognition is the only one that was significant. The other two, though not significant, tended to be on the lower side. But there have been other studies which have shown kind of similar results. So where are we with this association of extrauterine growth restriction and neurocognition? Well, there is a small association, but it's of low quality evidence. But what is more important is it seems to be related to a dose-dependent phenomenon. Those babies who show the greatest extrauterine growth restriction or the slowest rates of growth are the ones who seem to have the highest impact on their ultimate neurocognition. Stephens in 2009 actually showed that low protein energy intake in the first week had a major role to play in this so-called impaired neurocognition at 18 to 22 months. This observation of Stephens actually in a way spurred neonatologists to think differently and say, we need to chase a different reference. And we need to chase the intrauterine growth reference. And that was the norm at that time. The whole idea was a preterm baby should be growing even ex utero at the same rate as a fetus. And that obviously was not possible. And so came a time when neonatologists started shifting to what is known as aggressive nutrition. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But what is more important is the data that the Intergrowth 21 has shown us. This Intergrowth has, of course, it has the main Intergrowth, which is all talks about the fetal growth, it's the intrauterine growth at 40 weeks. But it also has data on preterm, so delivered preterm, and they were longitudinally followed up to see what happens. And you can clearly see that the red lines are the intrauterine growth based on ultrasound, and the blue lines depict the growth of preterm fetuses. And it's quite amply clear that ex utero, it is not possible for these babies to start jumping back from where they are back to intrauterine rates immediately. And the more preterm you are, the more difficult it's going to be. But the one very important observation is that by the time they get to 40 weeks, they all seem to catch up. So the whole question is whether this period, which we call as extrauterine growth restriction, is really pathological. Should we be chasing an aggressive nutrition policy? Does it have adverse effects by letting the baby not grow too well? Does it have adverse effects if we try to accelerate their growth? So these are some of the questions that I'm hoping to answer. But we must remember that no matter what we do, even with aggressive nutrition, often the grouped analysis suggests that babies still lag behind. So we need to understand what is it that I need to achieve? How much nutrition do I need to be able to provide to a baby if I have to achieve fetal rates of growth? And here you see the different weight strata in which the fetus baby may have been born. And clearly, the smaller the baby is in terms of weight and gestation, higher is the fetal accretion rate. So obviously your targets for smaller babies is to try and achieve much greater values, almost close to 20 grams per kg per day. And what we can see here is, of course, this is the protein requirement that we need. This is the energy requirement that we need. So clearly, unless I'm able to provide this baby from day one, something close to 3.5 to 4 grams per kg per day, I am likely to end up with a cumulative protein deficit of close to 15 grams per kg at the end of week 1. And similarly, when you look at energy, of course, remember that parenteral nutrition, the energy requirements are much less. The moment you give enteral, we need to add close to almost 20% extra for all the energy that's expended that needs for the absorption of nutrients. And you need to provide babies somewhere between around 120 kilocalories if it's enteral, or maybe 100 from day 1 of birth. And if you don't do that, the cumulative deficits like proteins are close to maybe 500 kilocalories cumulatively per kg at the end of week 1. So that's the kind of deficit that we have if we were to use a conventional ways of feeding which we have without too much of rigorous parenteral nutrition. And so keeping this set of figures in mind, emerged the whole philosophy of early aggressive feeding. And this feeding strategy now talks about making sure you have enough glucose to maintain euglycemia. 4 to 6 milligrams per kg per minute is what you require. But more importantly, you begin amino acid infusion straight away at birth. At least 2 grams, some people say 1.5, but anything close to 2 grams per kg per day, which traditionally we would introduce the earlier times at maybe the 3rd or the 4th day and build up later. And lipids too were to be introduced not later than 24 or not later than 48 hours. And in the next couple of days, that is by the time you're 4 days, the baby should be receiving a complete complement of 3.5 to 4 grams of protein, about 3 grams per kg of lipid. And of course, traditionally enteral nutrition in small babies was started more as trophic feeding, 10 to 15 ml per kg per day, built up slowly with the fear that they may end up with necrotizing enterocolitis, they may have feed intolerance, etc., etc. So that has been the philosophy that the West has used largely for babies who are less than 32 weeks. Of course, when you talk of the moderate preterms at 32 to 36, we are not so aggressive with parenteral because it is possible to maintain, get them onto enteral nutrition faster. So the duration of parenteral nutrition is much less. So this slide kind of sums up how this entire nutrition intake would work for a baby, let's say, who delivers at 24 weeks and goes right up to 6 months of post-corrected age. So you end up, you have a period, the first almost 6 weeks or so, where you need high protein intakes, at least 4 grams, which means it's a combination of parenteral plus enteral. And then gradually after 36 weeks, it begins to come down. And thereafter, you can see it keeps coming down. On the other hand, energy requirements can come down much faster. It's really, it seems to be the protein. Protein is a critical factor that is really required. And I'll share with you what studies suggest as to what this protein deficit does in terms of later outcomes. So energy is what we need is something like about 120 kilocalories. It's a combination of the two and comes down gradually. And so this has been the paradigm that is currently being used globally, more so in the West. Of course, we must remember in countries like ours and other low and middle income countries, parental nutrition is a challenge due to a variety of reasons. First is cost. Two is all the wherewithal that the unit needs to prepare it, with asepsis and so on. And one of the biggest risks that we have seen and faced is the secondary nosocomial infections due to not using appropriate asepsis. And of course, the fact that they need a huge amount of biochemical monitoring during the early days to monitor for the pH and the triglycerides and so on and so forth, all of which has a technology factor. And if you have a small baby, imagine trying to take large samples. And so most units don't even have capacities to do capillary samples where you can do small aliquots. And so the challenge is that LMICs today are faced with the fact that there is a global consensus among the high income countries of how small babies should be given nutrition, but we are handicapped by the fact that we can't do it. So the question is that, is this really bad? So what does early aggressive nutrition do to this growth? See, this on the left side is our more traditional way we used to feed. We used to feed them, slowly build up the enteral nutrition, and not so much a parental nutrition. And you would see the baby would kind of log off and then start catching up. But he would still be below centiles. You see, this is where he was born, maybe let's say close to the 50th centile, but then continues to grow somewhere under the 10th centile, but he continues to grow, the trajectory is upward. What did aggressive do? And when you did aggressive, you found that they didn't drop centiles. They actually continued to grow at pretty reasonably good centiles, and some point of time may even begin to cross their centiles from the birth centiles. So clearly, aggressive nutrition, as I just shared with you, did result in babies growing much faster. The question is whether that growing faster is good or not. When you look at the protein and its relation to neurocognition, Isaacs first documented in a long cohort follow-up to 16 years that preterms are randomized to high protein formula. And remember, the West always followed a philosophy of using more preterm formulas rather than human milk, and that this resulted in better brain structure and function at 16 years. But then a more larger systematic review that was published in 2015, which I'm sharing on the right side. And this is a gain outcome graph wherein the red lines depict where the results were statistically significantly associated. The gray bars suggest where there was no signal association. The length of the bars suggests the duration for which these interventions and follow-ups are done, and then you have the numbers in between. And you can clearly see that there are both enough number of reds and enough number of grays. So there seems to be an equipoise. As of today, there is not such convincing evidence that this addition of protein to the formula for feeding or to the early nutrition actually has an effect on neurocognition. The third part of what I wish to address is, what does this accelerated growth do and what's the relation to chronic cardiovascular disease? Well, there has been increasing a lot of data to suggest that this faster postnatal growth increases the later risk for cardiovascular disease. If I subdivide them as studies for preterms and terms, and you see here for the preterms, clearly there are studies which showed that 6 to 7 years, these children are more obese if they had faster weight gain in the first 6 weeks. And now there is actually a meta-analysis of almost 46 studies, which includes 10 cohorts with about 47, almost 48,000 kids participating in this, which shows the fast infant growth has been also associated with later obesity. So it kind of confirms what was found in the earlier data set. What about term growth restricted babies? Well, when term SGAs were assigned to nutrient-enriched formula. Of course, it resulted in better weight gain, but they also ended up with having higher diastolic BP at 6 to 8 years. And they also had greater fat mass, almost to the tune of ranging from 20 to 40% at 5 to 8 years as compared to those who didn't get the enriched formula. And these differences in fat mass or blood pressure were again related to the rate of change. So there's a dose response. So clearly, if you grow faster, those who grow more fast are more at risk of accruing more fat and also then translating into changes at risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So single and his group in 2004, quite early, much before a lot of this data came up, actually based on animal and some human data, actually suggested a hypothesis that growth acceleration is a risk factor for CVD. But we have always been looking at growth in terms of anthropometry. More weight, less for length, least of all for head circumference. Though we keep saying that a good head circumference and a good rate of head circumference translates to better human adult capital. But probably what is most important, and I'm sure as nutritionists you all agree, more important is the composition of the body. We need to understand what all this does to composition. So this is one of the largest meta-analysis that has been done, which looked at the studies, we looked at what happens to the body composition of preterms when they reach term equivalent, let's say about 40 weeks of gestation. And most of these studies had babies at about 30 weeks, so they had close to almost 9 to 10 weeks of follow-up. And what this analysis showed was that when these preterms with all the kind of nutrition we're talking about, aggressive, reached 40 weeks, they're of course shorter and lighter, but they also ended up with having more fat and less fat-free mass. So the question really is whether the obesity and the excess fat that we are seeing later is the nidus for that already been put in place as a result of what we do to these babies in the first few weeks of life. Most of these studies, remember, have been done on formula feeds. These babies were on formulas. The question is, what happens with human milk? We always seem to believe that the human milk is the best nutrition and human milk has numerous advantages. It's protective. And this very elegant study that Bergner and his group did at Houston, Texas Children's Hospital, which was published last year, they looked at about 50 preterm infants who were very low birth weight with a mean gestation somewhere around 29 weeks. And they were followed up till about 18 to 22 weeks of corrected age. And these babies were those who received exclusive human milk and no formulas. Of course, they got some human milk fortifiers for augmenting early growth, because that's been a philosophy that if a baby after the first week was not gaining at the rate of about 1.5 to 2% of his birth weight, roughly 15 grams per kg, on full enteral feeding, it was felt that they warranted to enhance the protein intake. And so human milk fortifiers were used. What you see here are data for weight, the length, and the head circumference. And this is where they were at birth, and this is where they were at corrected age of 18 to 22 months. So clearly you can see that these babies were at a much lower Z-score at the time they got discharged as compared to their birth Z-score. But clearly by the time they were 12 to 15 months, they'd all moved up. They'd all moved up. The same was true for length, and the same was true for head circumference. So clearly, the fact that there is some slower growth, I think we should start using the term growth retardation, because that's kind of seems to send out a signal that is pathologic, and we need to understand that this is not pathologic, but this is an adaptive phenomena for the baby after he's come out from the uterus. What happens to the fat, the composition? So they carried out fat composition measurements. As you know that we have had many, one of the reasons for a lot of variations in the data with regard to body composition has been the technique that we've used. Initially, it was Dancy who suggested an anthropometric formulae where we used skin fold thickness at multiple sites, and he evolved a formula, geometric progression based on the different sites of the body, a study which we had also done some years ago. That was at a time when we did not have DEXA or air plethysmography. Then people used bioimpedance, but it's been shown that both of them don't work. And today the gold standard for any measurement for body composition is either DEXA or air displacement plethysmography. Both of these are very expensive, and also requires the baby to be kind of displaced from NICU. But one of the advantages, the air displacement plethysmography, which you see on the right side, this little peapod, is that it can be placed right next. It's like a NICU machine size, not very large. It's right, can be placed right next to the baby in the ICU, and you could actually take these measurements. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes. So they used the air displacement plethysmography technique, and they measured, and what they showed was at the age of 18 to 22, that if you're able to increase mother's own milk, for every 10% increase that you made the mother's own milk, remember they've got donor milk too, if they didn't have mother's milk, but if you got the mother's own milk, they predicted a 0.08 kg reduction in fat mass. That means the quicker you can provide the baby with his mother's own milk, it has a protective effect of causing less adiposity. They also showed that for every 5 gram per day increase in growth during the NICU stay, predicted an increase of 0.4 grams in the lean body mass, which in other words means that even if you have good growths and it's on human milk doesn't seem to create excess fat deposition. And similarly, they also showed that if you had a 5 gram per day increase in NICU weight growth, it predicted an almost 20 gram increase in the bone mineral content. So clearly, providing primarily exclusive human milk has huge advantages in terms of body composition as the baby grows, in compared to all that we have seen so far when we looked at formulas and providing aggressive nutrition. So the association of a better recovery of body composition to the promotion of the mass deposition seems to be the message that we get when you look at preterm feeding with human milk, which therefore assume that it will lead to an improved metabolic and neurodevelopment outcome. Of course, in the previous study, I didn't share the data, but they showed that at 2 years, neurodevelopment was better, much more for language than for the others. But what they showed here is something that we had shown almost 12 years or 13 years ago when we were doing a study on the longitudinal growth of these babies. And that's a time when I used the Dancy's formula. And in just an example, here's a 31-weeker. These were babies who exclusively received human milk. We did not use any parental nutrition in those days. And you can clearly see that these babies in terms of weight were exactly what Villar and this group in the intergroup showed, that by the time they reached 40 weeks, all these babies had caught up, and in fact, some of them even crossed centiles. And it's clear that crossing centiles, this accelerated growth with human milk, doesn't seem to have the same deleterious effects as compared to, sorry, is my screen gone off? Can you see my screen? Yeah. So the deleterious effects are not seen with human milk, and so clearly the strategy that we will start having to look at is how to.
Sir, can you
Sir,
share
we
the
are
screen
not
again,
able to
sir?
see your slides, sir.
Okay, just a
Can you
minute.
share the screen again?
Yeah, I'll do that. Sorry, something happened. I remember that.
Suddenly playing screen.
madam.
Practice the other.
కాదుది అది సార్ దగ్గరే ఏదో అనిటేషన్ సర్వే అనుకుంటా.
Just a minute. I'll just do that. I will free your screen.
The mic should be off. Somebody's mic is on.
Can you see now?
Sir,
Yeah.
sir,
Yes,
all
yes.
speakers may be unmute, sir.
No.
Except speaker,
All others.
You can.
all others, please mute the
All
mic.
others are requested to mute except the speaker.
Sorry. Is my screen visible now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Absolutely fine.
So as I was saying that, it's very clear that the human milk actually has the benefits, and I think that's a strategy I shall talk about soon. We cannot be talking about. Sorry. Just a minute. I'm just going to stop and restart because there's some problem with the screen. Just a minute. Is that visible now? Can you see
Yes.
it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So now we actually, I think a time has come where we should stop looking at just anthropometric changes in growth. I think a time has come where we should probably also be looking at how body composition changes as part of nutrition. And for the first time, we now have a set of composition charts, which are developed in the US at the moment. I'm sure we can do it in India too, where they used, of course, they used the DEXA, and they have now a chart starting from 30 weeks upwards for both fat-free mass and fat mass. In fact, at the present moment, there's a large cohort study which we initiated at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi, which I think now is 3 years in, where they're using the air displacement plethysmography to look at change in body composition among preterms, term SGAs, term AGAs, and follow them up, not only to look at nutritional changes, but look at how it affects childhood morbidities like respiratory infections and others, and also go on later to see how it affects, likely to affect cardiometabolic risk. So I think this cohort will, in some years, give us some insight into what's happening to our Indian babies. So if that be the case, one of the challenges is, can I actually give complete total enteral feeding from day one, in spite of all the concerns that we've had? There have been several studies, mostly from India, and the most recent have been from Dr. Nangia and the group from Delhi, where they randomized about 180 very low birth weight neonates to either complete total enteral feeding or the conventional mode of feeding, where they got part intravenous alimentation and part IV. And all of them, of course, got only human milk, no formula. Either they got mother's own milk or they got the donor milk. And what they showed was it was possible to do it, and full enteral feed you could achieve before the first week. And the net result was that these babies actually had lower feed intolerance, they had lower clinical sepsis, and hospital stay came down. All of this has not only benefits for the baby, but it has immense benefits for the health system. Nothing in nutrition is over by just talking about macronutrients. And I need to talk about some micronutrients because there's been a lot of controversy. As a consensus, we have always believed that preterms are deficient in the various micronutrients, and human milk is also deficient to meet the intrauterine accretion rates. And so they all must be supplemented. But what does the data suggest? If you look at iron and look at all the iron supplementations, what do we achieve? We achieve increase hemoglobin, improved iron stores, some little anemia becomes lower at 6 months, but there seems to be no long-term benefit in terms of neurodevelopmental outcome or growth. If you look at vitamin D, and traditionally we used to use something like 400 IU, now it's said that you should go up to 800 to 1000, and this is based on the fact that with these dosage, there is a better length and head circumference gain, which you see. But again, there's nothing to suggest what happens in terms of the long-term outcome. Vitamin A. I think the Cochrane data very clearly shows that vitamin A does not affect neural mortality, and there is no difference in neurodevelopment outcome at 18 to 22 months of age. And when you come to zinc, while there is evidence to suggest that it may decrease all-cause mortality, an RR about 0.5, which comes from only 3 studies and about 350 infants, the certainty of evidence is low. And we again have nothing on the long-term outcomes. So clearly at this moment, even though our practice is to supplement all these low birth weight babies with micronutrients, we do not have sufficient evidence to know what good they are doing. And I think there is therefore a very urgent need for us to look at this issue, because we do know that micronutrient deficiencies in the mother continue to impact these babies. But whether giving babies the micronutrients when born to a mother who's micronutrient deficient is going to alter this in terms of the baby's outcome is something we don't know. And finally, what is it that we should be therefore adopting? The trade-off really is between getting better growth, lower morbidity, and cognition, which is what happens when you give better nutrition. We know that our low birth weight survive better. But at the same time, we have to balance the risk with obesity and chronic cardiovascular disease. So what I propose for LMICs in particular, and of course it's no exception for the high income also, is that for majority of very low birth weight babies who are stable, it is possible to start a total enteral nutrition with human milk from day one. And of course, we therefore need to be aggressive with regard to lactation counseling, with regard to breastfeeding, and be able to collect human milk. And we have seen now we have a huge plethora of milk banks that have been created in this country, part of the national health program on mother and child. And we collect a great deal of milk. In fact, milks are transported across 40 to 50 or even 60 kilometers to supply to district hospitals and other places where newborns are done in the public sector. So it is possible. We know that many mothers actually produce far more milk than what the babies need. So we are depriving nobody of that milk, and a combination of the donor milk and mother's own milk should achieve this. And of course, if the need really arises, one can use a human milk fortifier during the transient phase to improve protein intake. And more importantly, not chase the intrauterine growth, but just use the preterm growth only to track the trajectory of growth, as I said. We just need to make sure that they're going up, parallel, or upwards. So eventually, most of these babies will get back to their own centiles as is appropriate for them. The research gap that we really have is to kind of understand what is the relationship of the type of feeding, the growth, the body composition to long-term risk of adult chronic disease. These cohort studies are needed. We have so far used many cohort studies, but when you look at the cohort studies, most of them have growth. They have some history on feeding, but very little on body composition. So I think a time has come when we need to launch on some of these studies, invest in some of these studies to see what is going to happen in terms of long-term outcome. And I believe that that will change the scenario for us, because given the dual burden of malnutrition that we have in the country, undernutrition since birth, undernutrition later, and the transitional economies going into obesity in early childhood and the consequences of chronic vascular disease, I think we need to look at the whole paradigm of maternal nutrition to the newborn nutrition to what we feed to our kids if we want to solve the problem of or mitigate or minimize the huge burden of non-communicable disease that India has now experienced. Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on this area. Thank you so much.
That was really excellent talk, sir. If there are any remarks from past presidents, they are welcome.
I think congratulations, Dr. Siddharth Ramji. It was I expected a good talk, and it was an excellent talk. So thank you for all the one, and it was presented in a so simple, so understandable manner without too much of complex graphs. So you really did a wonderful job, and I'm sure this is how Dr. Srikanta himself would have spoken on this particular. Thank you. Thank you.
Kamala Krishna, Prakash.
Before moving on to the next agenda, we will just switch it off for just 1 minute and we'll be back. Thank you.
Wonderful talk, Dr. Siddharth. You made us go back into the very basic work of nutrition, which is fantastic.
Thank you.
I congratulate you on behalf of IUNS and all other organizations, which really are today looking at this pathbreaker, a game changer in nutrition work. All the best, and wish you the best in your real endeavor to solve this problem from a national perspective and for health and foods and nutrition security. Thank you.
Okay, now?
Sorry for the inconvenience. One remark I would like to make, and this is between the trade-off between growth trajectories and metabolic risk. Personally, I would prefer growth trajectories because that will grow across generations. I mean, when we have to improve rapidly, probably we have to sacrifice one aspect to obtain another one. Because if growth improves, it spills over generations. For fear of metabolic risk, if we stop that trajectory, we are losing out a lot. So that is my personal opinion, sir. Thank you very much. That was really a very wonderful talk. And I mean, it is really thought-provoking, and we really learned many things. And you opened up many research avenues also. Thank you, sir. So we'll move on to the next agenda. Now, Dr. Lakshmaya.
Dr. Rajamal Devadas Award.
We'll go on to Dr. Rajamal P. Devadas Memorial Award, and Dr. Arlappa will be presenting about the award, and Dr. Kausalya will be telling a few words about the recipient. Thank you. Yes, Dr.
Arlappa.
This is about the award. The Rajamal P. Devadas Memorial Lecture Award was instituted by the Nutrition Society of India in association with Avinashalingam Education Trust and Avinashalingam University of Women in the year 2009. Dr. Rajamal P. Devadas lovingly called Amma by her colleagues and students, had made significant contributions in the field of nutrition science, home science, and women's development in the country. She was the president of the Nutrition Society of India during 1987 to 1991. Born in Kallikulam in Tirunelveli district of Tamil Nadu, Dr. Rajammal had her early education in Chennai and graduated from Women's Christian College, Chennai. She received her PhD degree from Ohio State University, USA, with copious honors in 1950, and her postdoctoral DSc degree from the University of Madras in 1978. As a leading nutritionist of international reputation, Dr. Devadas, in her various capacities as principal, vice chancellor, and chancellor, had a great academic record throughout. Dr. Devadas held several celebrated positions such as Chief Home Economist and Joint Director Home Science, Ministry of Food and Agriculture, Government of India, 1955-61, and Assistant Director Nutrition, ICAR, 1975-76. She is also served with immense merit as the Regional Vice President, International Federation for Women in Agriculture. Similarly, Regional Direct Coordinator for Research, World Alliance for Breastfeeding, and the first Vice President of the World Food Conference convened by the FAO in 1970 in Hague, Holland. Besides holding many other memorable advisory positions in national and international organizations. Dr. Rajammal's major scientific contributions in the area of home science and community nutrition have resulted in various implementable programs. To name a few, statewide nutritious noon meal program of the government of Tamil Nadu, organization of training programs for thousands of workers involved in nutrition intervention programs, nutrition and health education, and environmental sanitation for primary school teachers in the state of Tamil Nadu. She toiled hard to educate the community on the significance of nutrition by developing educational materials and conducting research and community outreach programs. She was the chief editor of Indian Journal of Nutrition and Dietetics. She was left behind to her credit over 500 research papers and 57 books. She represented India in more than 50 international nutrition and home science conferences in about 40 countries. She received many awards from various national and international organizations for her commendable and priceless service in different fields, including Tagore Literacy Award, Padma Shri from Government of India in 1992, and Dr. B.C. Guha Memorial Award 1993. She was awarded the honorary degree of Humane Letters from Oregon State University and Ohio State University 1994. Honorary DSc from Chandrasekhar Azad University of Agriculture and Technology, Kanpur. Honorary degree of DSc from University of Ulster, Northern Ireland 1996. G.D. Birla Award 1998. The Malcolm S. Adisheshai Award in 2000. And the prestigious International Union of Nutritional Sciences Award in 2001 at Vienna, Austria. The phenomenal growth of the Avinash Lingam Institution to the present heights is only due to the consistent and unstinted efforts of Dr. Devadas. Sri Avinash Lingam Home Science College for Women was established in 1957. The Home Science College acquired the deemed university status in 1988 to Dr. Rajammal P. Devadas as its first Vice Chancellor. Dr. Rajammal P. Devadas Memorial Lecture Award is given every year to an outstanding woman nutrition scientist of Indian origin working in India and who has made tremendous contributions in the field of applied nutritional sciences. The Nutrition Society of India is proud to announce the 11th Dr. Rajammal P. Devadas Memorial Lecture on mainstreaming nutrition from preconception to old age, the life course approach, will be delivered by Dr. Seema Puri, Associate Professor, Department of Nutrition, Institute of Home Economics, University of Delhi. And the floor is open to Vinay.
Congrats.
Yeah. Chippan. Dr. Kausalya. Unmute.
You will present the award, ma'am, or I will? Okay. Our speaker for the Dr. Rajamal P. Devdas Memorial Award lecture is Dr. Seema Puri. Dr. Seema Puri had completed MSc Food Science and Nutrition from University of Delhi as a gold medalist in 1980. She started her career in teaching and research in the Institute of Home Economics, University of Delhi. Her doctoral work focused on the nutritional profile of elderly women. With over 35 years of teaching and research experience, she is currently working as Associate Professor in the Department of Food and Nutrition at the Institute of Home Economics, University of Delhi. She has developed and implemented an innovative postgraduate diploma program in health and social gerontology in Delhi University, one of its first courses in the country. She has been awarded several fellowships, including ICR Junior Fellowship, UNFPA Fellowship, Australian Awards Fellowship, and Canadian Coalition of Global Health Research Fellowship to undertake specialized trainings abroad in nutrition policy research, global health research, qualitative research methodology, and social gerontology. She was a recipient of the World Bank Award on Innovate for Nutrition, Family and Community Approaches for Improving Infant and Young Child Nutrition in 2009. She has been conferred the Distinguished Services Award by the Geriatric Society of India in 2010 and for her significant contribution to nutrition and dietetics in 2014. She has been honored as an honorary visiting professor to Jumanji University, Japan. She has research interests covering the life cycle and include infant and young child nutrition, childhood obesity, NCDs, bone health, geriatric nutrition, and she has guided more than 50 postgraduate and 20 doctoral students. She has undertaken several research projects funded by World Bank, UNICEF, WHO, University of Sydney, DST, ICMR, and other national and international agencies in India and abroad. She has published extensively with over 110 publications and nearly 2,900 citations. Publications to her credit include a popular textbook of nutrition and dietetics, an edited book on diet and aging, and an upcoming edited book on children in India, opportunities and challenges. She is presently Vice Chief Editor, Asian Journal of Dietetics, and Associate Editor, International Journal of Home Economics. She has a short-term consultant has served for UNICEF, WHO, FAO, and UNWFP. And she is on the board of the project review groups of national and international committees like DST, ICMR, Government of Delhi, Ministry of Health, and at present at FSSI as a member of the scientific panels on labeling and functional foods and nutraceuticals and dietetic products. She is a member of several academic bodies, including South Indian Feeding Research Network, International Federation of Home Economics, and the like. She was a national vice president of the IDA, and currently she is the executive council member of the Nutrition Society of India. We congratulate Dr. Seema Puri on behalf of the Nutrition Society of India and Avinash Lingam Institutes in receiving the prestigious award, the 11th award in the name of Dr. Rajamal P. Devdas. Thank you.
Certificate. అది పిన్ చేశారు కదా స్క్రీన్ పిన్ చేయండి.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations, madam.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Now the floor is yours, Dr. Seema.
Thank you, ma'am.
You can share your screen now.
Yes, respected Dr. Hemlata and dignitaries at NIN and friends and members of NSI. I'm most humbled to be receiving this prestigious award today dedicated to the memory of Dr. Rajamal Devdas, a pioneer and luminary in home science. As a young researcher, some 20 years ago, I recollect, I was comparing an inaugural function of a conference on diet and aging organized by Dr. Kalyan Bagchi, and Dr. Devdas was the chief guest. In all my nervousness, I forgot the lighting ceremony and invited her directly for the inaugural address. When I remembered my error, I covered up by saying at the end that Dr. Devdas' address was so illuminating and enlightening that we really don't need to light the lamp. But as a protocol, we will go back to it and light the lamp. She laughed it off and at tea time came up to me and said, you will go a long way, young girl. And I think it's with her blessings that I am here today. And I wish to dedicate this to her memory. Thank you so much, Dr. Devdas, and to also Nutrition Society of India for conferring this award and thinking I'm worthy of it. My research journey in nutrition, I have tried to cover contemporary issues in nutrition during the life course. And is my screen visible? So I'm going to today highlight my journey and the various aspects that I've been dealing with during this research journey. What is the life course approach? So the life course approach proposes that environmental exposures, including biological, physical, social, and behavioral factors, not only influence health outcomes in the present generation, but also impact future generations. And therefore, the nutrition as one of these environmental exposures has the potential to influence individual or population health trajectories and their intergenerational differences. This is a slide by Kalashe in 1997. It's a very conventional slide which we all follow, but it clearly shows that how important it is to look at the exposures right from early life to older age, and how if we follow the correct path with the right exposures, we have a better quality of life in old age. And if not, the disability sets in, and that affects the functional ability as well as the quality of life in older age. Since I began my research journey with working with older persons, starting with my doctoral thesis, I'm going to reverse the life course discussion in this presentation by starting from old age and going to the newborn infant. So looking at this slide, you can see that India is in the midst of a demographic transition. And we also show the state of various other countries. From a pyramid, we are fast moving to a barrel. A country like Japan is already had the barrel situation, as now moving back to an inverted pyramid. So the good part of this is that while the elderly population is fast increasing, we still have a very young population in larger numbers. So that is a very it's a great plus point for our country. So as Margaret Chan said, being in the older age group is becoming the new normal for the world's population. And in India, we find that from an aging country at 8.9% of the population, by 2050, we are expecting it to be nearly 20%. And what is worrying, or what is of concern, I would say, is that the oldest old, the above 80 years of age, would increase by triple, by 3 times. And this increase is increasing the need for dependency, increasing the need for care. Now in India today also, the family is the primary caregiver, and there are no social support systems in place. And therefore these dependency needs are going to be a great burden on the family. And along with that, as we're all aware, there is a decline in the burden of communicable diseases, but there is an increase in the chronic disease prevalence as well as accidents. So if we look at nutrition as one of the exposures, we find that the elderly needs are very different. Their energy needs become lower. but their mineral vitamin needs do not change. In fact, they may be a little higher than what they were when they were younger. And that becomes a difficult part to accommodate in their diet. We also find that nutrition plays an important role in the manifestation of chronic disease. So along with physiological aging, they also have pathological aging, which also impacts their quality of life. And that further influences their diet and nutrient needs. And because of this, older persons are particularly vulnerable to malnutrition. And one thing very important to note, that malnutrition in older persons cuts across socioeconomic groups. So it's not governed by just financial insecurity. There are many, many other reasons why a person, elderly person, gets malnourished. And these need to be addressed if we want to ensure that they are well nourished. So like I just said, that poor nutrition cuts across all socioeconomic groups. And as the person ages, the diet quality decreases. And we find both. We find chronic energy deficiency as well as obesity. And like I said, the other factors, the psychosocial factors like death of a spouse, depression, living alone, dependency on others for getting food, problems in cooking, all these are factors which impact their food and nutrition intake. So this is again an overview of the causes of inadequacy. And as you can see, physiological factors are there as we grow older. Multiple morbidities, along with the associated polypharmacy, has a major impact. And with so many medications going in, the drug-nutrient interactions need to be considered. Besides that, even issues like dementia and psychological issues of depression, grief, anxiety, all these impact. A very important aspect also is the social factor. So the lack of interaction, lack of social support systems, all these do have an impact on the nutritional intake of elderly. This was a very interesting study we had done on centenarians, and we wanted to find out what were the secrets of their longevity. And a common thread which came out among these two studies was that they felt they had good genes. They all had a very disciplined lifestyle, whether it was in terms of eating habits, in terms of physical activity. Their diets were very balanced, very regular. They had small portion sizes. They believed that vegetarianism and desi ghee was a secret of their longevity. This is their perception. But another common thread was that strong social networks and social engagement kept them going. In fact, this picture is of a gentleman who was 99 years of age. He was a retired chief engineer, and he came to our college to speak to our students because he was very keen to interact with the young generation. Frailty is another upcoming area of research. And we find that frailty is basically increased vulnerability and not equivalent to disability. Also, it is not an inevitable part of aging, which is unfortunately what most people think. And we can improve or we can let it deteriorate. So it can vary in severity, and any small trigger like an infection or a fall can aggravate or result in a dramatic deterioration in the frailty of the individual. So this is data from other studies which shows that osteoporosis is another major concern in elderly, and especially in postmenopausal women. And this showed a prevalence of 20% approximately of osteoporosis. Frailty, I'll talk in detail in the next slide. And cognitive decline, it's seen now starting from 45 years of age, and various parameters of the cognition score, whether it was verbal fluency or memory or arithmetic skills, you can see the deterioration increases as the age increases. When you look at frailty, we found in a study that we had conducted in the community that only 7% of the elderly were not frail, which is really alarming. 73% were heading towards frailty and 20% were frail. And like I said, this is avoidable if adequate measures are taken early on in age. It also sets in a much lower age among Indians. And the frailty that we saw in our population was not due to a low muscle mass, but it was basically due to low muscle strength. And one of the most important causation factors was physical inactivity. And so even a simple exercise regimen, including resistance training, would help to maintain muscle strength. We also investigated the vitamin D levels because in terms of bone health, and we did find that in the elderly, over 2/3 were vitamin D deficient, and diet or physical activity did not contribute to the vitamin D status. It was basically the body surface area implied by exposure to sunlight, which was significantly associated with the vitamin D levels. And therefore, I think even at a younger age, to prevent frailty in old age, we must have a physical activity, nutrition, and exposures to sunlight kind of a regimen for these elderly people, for them to maintain a good quality of life. Again, number of risk factors have been identified for frailty. I won't read them all in detail, but basically living alone, depression, low cognitive performance, psychosocial factors, undernutrition or overnutrition, poor physical activity, and that related to neighborhood characteristics, lowest education levels, socioeconomic status, a number of factors which are quite common to a number of chronic diseases also which occur during this age group. With all these data emerging, we decided, and there was a need to create awareness among the elderly. They were all demanding that there should be a handy book that they can read, where they can get information from. And this was before the internet explosion had occurred. So we devised a booklet on guide to healthy eating in old age, which had simple guidelines to nutrition. It also had healthy versions of traditional recipes. So we interviewed elderly to see what they would like to eat and tried to make healthier versions of them. And accompanying that, we also then subsequently developed some audio messages which could be broadcast in doctors' clinics and common community settings and all that. And this was supported by DST. Coming to the next stage, the adults who are the elderly of tomorrow. Again, as you can see here, for NCD prevention, NCDs are now starting even in young adulthood. And we find that the preventive strategies start right from fetal life. And as Sir previously has talked about it, birth weight is very important, maternal nutritional status, right through infancy, adolescence, adulthood, all the lifestyle factors can increase the risk of NCDs. And therefore, if we want to prevent them, we have to reduce this risk by controlling these factors. So again, looking at this data, which shows that this is from the NCD report of the government, the hypertension is increasing in our country. It increases with age, but it's also seen in younger population. And surprisingly, more than 70% of the cases are undiagnosed. Diabetes is nearly double the prevalence in urban areas as compared to rural areas. And cardiovascular disease, we know the prevalence has increased, and it's now the top cause of mortality and morbidity. So some of our studies which looked at some other chronic diseases, I would say, we found a 57% prevalence for metabolic syndrome, again, among community living adults, about 70% prevalence or more for different forms of dyslipidemia, and 67% of community members had NAFLD as diagnosed by ultrasound. So the NCD picture is really of concern, and it's high time that something is done about it. It's interesting and it's heartening also to know that the government is now having targets for reducing risk of NCDs. And as you can see here, by 2025, they have set targets for various parameters, whether it is mortality or it is lifestyle factors, or it is even management, to achieve the risk reduction in NCDs as well as in the management of NCDs. So looking at these, we try to look at some food-based approaches, which may play a role in control of these common NCDs. And one of them was probiotics, and this is a meta-analysis which was done, where we found that there is a positive effect of probiotics on the serum total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol levels. We also looked at prebiotics, and we also found that the scientific evidence is quite heartening, and that also had a beneficial effect on LDL cholesterol and triglycerides. So based on this, we did a trial on supplementing with a symbiotic yogurt, which had both pre and probiotics, to see the effect on the risk factor profile of hypercholesterolemic adults. And we found that 8 weeks of supplementation did improve the lipid parameters, besides, of course, improving their gut health. Another intervention that was successful was the effect of oral cinnamon intervention on metabolic profile of patients with metabolic syndrome. And we found that 3 grams of cinnamon given for 16 weeks resulted in a significant improvement in all components of metabolic syndrome in a study that we did in Delhi. And this included the HbA1c, the blood glucose, plus the anthropometric profile, as well as the cholesterol and LDL triglyceride levels. Interestingly, it also led to an increase in the HDL levels. So the other concern that we have in adulthood is the triple burden of malnutrition, which is undernutrition in terms of stunting and underweight in children, or chronic energy deficiency, coupled with micronutrient deficiencies of various micronutrients. And on the other hand, we have the overnutrition and the associated NCDs. So if you look at the prevalence of triple burden of malnutrition, and the NFHS4 data identified a prevalence of 5.7% among mother-child pairs. And they also identified among mother-child pairs a prevalence of between 2 to 4% of an overweight mother with an undernourished child. But interestingly, the prevalence of overweight mother with an anemic child was much higher at around 8%. And therefore, the hidden hunger, I would feel, is a problem that is getting overlooked, because it's not so visible in terms of, and community studies sometimes are not effective in capturing it. We did a study on double burden of malnutrition in an urban slum in Delhi, and we found much, much higher prevalence. So we found a prevalence of 41%, nearly 42% of double burden households, where there were different combinations of underweight mother, underweight or overweight mother and child. And about 44% of them were single burden. So there was some form of malnutrition. And this is not hidden hunger. This is only overweight and underweight. So as you can see, and when we looked at this data further, we found that 61%, or the most common form, was an undernourished child with an overnourished mother. And basically, it was interesting also to find that households with no malnutrition had greater levels of food insecurity as compared to the households which had malnourished individuals. So food security does not really translate into nutrition security, according to this study. Considering that sports persons are considered to be in the best of health, we decided to investigate their profiles. And what we found is that there were gross inadequacies in macro and micronutrient intakes, coupled with improper food choices among them. And we did find that while their vitamin D status was better than non-sports players, we also found that their nutrient intakes, physical activity, direct sunlight exposure was significantly higher, but yet there were areas which needed some kind of strengthening. Looking at the micronutrient malnutrition, another aspect that we did was the consumer acceptability trials of double fortified salt and multiple nutrient fortified salt to understand whether they would be acceptable as a strategy to combat hidden hunger. We did find they were acceptable because the slight discoloration which happens, the coloring which is imparted, in fact, is interpreted as a richer color. You know, there's a lot more masala to the vegetable or the dal, and therefore it's much more appealing. And the acceptability was much greater when the consumers were made aware of the benefits of these salts. So it could be a very viable strategy for combating micronutrient malnutrition. We have various studies that we've done in school children and adolescents, and we do know that there has been a shift to high fat, high sugar, so-called westernized diets, which has resulted in increasing obesity levels. And we do know that undernourishment in children leads to a greater incidence of NCDs when they grow older. And also it has an impact on not only the cognitive function, but even skills, educational outputs, and then in fact, economics and productivity when they grow old. So this was a study that we had done in rural Haryana, where we took 3 village clusters closer to, they were at different distances from the highway, and they were under different stages of nutrition transition. And we evaluated the nutritional status of young children. We found that the access to unhealthy food was there, and the unhealthy food was replacing the home food, but yet the prevalence of obesity was not so high. We also found that their energy intakes were very high, but the diet quality was poor. And the fact was that they had very high levels of physical activity and also high levels of infection. And that is why, but maybe the contributing factor that obesity was not so high and undernutrition was still prevalent in these transitional villages. If you look at the obesogenic environment, like this diagram very clearly shows, that the causes are predominantly societal and not individual. And therefore, we need to really look at the factors besides just nutrition and look at the access to playing areas, sports, the fact of easy access to food, advertising, social media, internet. So a lot of factors are creating this environment which is conducive to obesity. And this was a study which we had done among affluent school children in India, in New Delhi. And as part of our sampling procedure, we took 2 regions of Delhi. And interestingly, when the findings came in, the picture was very different among the 2 regions, the South Delhi and the West Delhi. And what we found that contextual factors, even the prevalence was different. As you can see here, the prevalence was much higher in West Delhi as compared to South Delhi. And the contextual factors in terms of family profile, education levels, the awareness, the eating out patterns, the choice of foods, the opportunities for physical activity were distinctly different. So we really need to look at the contextual factors for creating obesity. This was a recent, again, so we looked at the labeling, the awareness about labels among consumers. And while 80% of these young adults knew that nutritional information helps to make better choices, and they perceived that the nutrition information is useful, only around 52% were reading the labels. And therefore, the label was not really being thought about. And a very, very recent study, which has been published in the Indian Journal of Nutrition and Dietetics, found that we did a content analysis of food-related television advertisements. And we found that the most advertised and the most watched category was chocolate candies and lollipops, both on children and adult channels. And there was no gross violation of claims, but there were some claims which were depicted in this manner to mislead the consumer. Interestingly, what I'd also like to highlight here is that children were not watching children's channels so much because the mothers would be watching the family serials in the afternoon after they came back from school, and the children would be asked to sit with them. So the children were actually getting exposed to the serials and the adult channels which the mothers looked at. And we never think of the advertising which comes on the adult channels as an influencing factor for children, which we really need to think about. So looking at the school intervention programs, we know the school is an ideal site for interventions. And therefore, we had some studies on this. This was a milk intervention program. And there were a lot of lessons learned One is that if you need to do an intervention program, from the study we realize you need to orient the teachers, parents, all the stakeholders, even the guard at the gate, even the ayahs who help the children. They need to be introduced to the intervention. We need to actually monitor it. So what we found in this study is that we were distributing the milk at the recess when they were also getting midday meal, and they couldn't eat both, so they were throwing away the milk. And when we changed that to the assembly time, we found the compliance was nearly 100%, because many of these children came hungry from home, and therefore that was the time they were able to have it. They also demanded a variety in flavor. So monitoring and getting regular feedback and moving according to that is important. Another important observation was that many children were obese. And so do they really need to have that extra intervention? So maybe we need to look at a targeted approach in future. Also, the fact that schools are working for about 280 days in a year or even less, we need to cover vacation time, because whatever gains there are in the nutritional status of the child, when they come back, the gain is lost. This was another trial that we did for hygiene, health, and nutrition. And we found there was a significant increase in the adoption of these practices after our intervention. But there were barriers and enablers. Of course, involvement of teachers, engagement of NGOs was good. The barriers were teaching them to use soap and water to wash their hands, but there was no soap and water in the school. So, resource constraints are there, poor supervision is there, and the fact that there are a lot of street foods available outside the school. And this was kind of negating the effect on health or good nutrition that we were talking about inside, because as soon as they came out, they were bombarded with these sellers. This was another intervention to evaluate whether fitness gets affected by a physical activity and health education program. And we did find that at the end of 4 months, there was a significant improvement both in nutrition knowledge and the fitness levels in the school. So therefore, the school is an ideal platform for intervening and developing good habits among children. We also did work on bone health, and we found a very high prevalence of hypovitaminosis D in different school children. And we also then supplemented them with mega doses of cholecalciferol. And we found a significant increase in their vitamin D levels. But a recent trial that we've just completed, where we gave fortified milk for 3 months, we did not find an increase in vitamin D levels to the expected levels, maybe because it was not effective, it was not adequate to 40 IU, or it was harsh winter, or there was pollution. So when the availability of ultraviolet rays is low. So there are multiple factors. It just highlights there are multiple factors which could influence the adequacy of nutrients in our body. When we talk of infant and young child feeding, we know that it's an important intervention. It's in all international and national documents. Very important that women have access to a community-based IYCF counseling support system. And we need to upgrade the skills of health workers, maybe have special lactation counselors to strengthen this aspect. We need to strengthen maternity protection. Maternity leave in the informal sector is negligible. There is no monitoring system for IYCF programs or components in any public programs, and maybe converting the IYCF guidelines into a policy framework would help to establish some of these monitoring systems and programs. So we had also studied low birth weight infants in their first year of life. What are their growth trajectories? And as also explained by Dr. Ramji, they had a significantly higher velocity as compared to non-low birth weight, normal birth weight infants. And as you can see here, so this is the catch-up growth which occurred. The red line you can see is a tremendous catch-up growth in weight for age and length for age. And by the age of 1 year, the differences became statistically insignificant, indicating that there was catch-up growth. We also studied the IYCF practices in Delhi NCR, and we found that 30% infants had early initiation of breastfeeding, despite 80% having institutional deliveries. And only 60% or so had exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months, and only 45% mothers initiated complementary food at 6 months. So we really need to strengthen this component. And the indicators of MDD, MMF, and MAD were poor across all socioeconomic groups. This was a study across all socioeconomic groups. Of course, it was much poorer in the urban poor. So we were expecting that there would be a shift from traditional home-based foods to commercially available complementary foods because of the change in food environment. But we found the contrary. The use of home-based complementary foods was more prevalent as compared to the commercial foods. But products like biscuits and chips, etc., which are not really considered to be infant foods, their consumption was very high. So we decided to map the kind of foods which are available in the market. And we found that since the IMS code is quite strictly enforced in India, we did not find any strong deviations, and the promotions of any kind were only seen in about 9% of the foods covered. And therefore, we need to have a more focused approach to target complementary feeding. And besides breastfeeding, there's a lot of interventions happening for breastfeeding, but complementary feeding needs to be really strengthened. A study that we did on challenges for working women, like I said, there was no maternity leave for the informal sector. They had no creches, they had no feeding rooms. And so they were either forced to leave the job, or they were, guilty all the time of leaving the child with somebody else. And we found that it was now the maternal family, the community workers, maybe the doctors in the upper socioeconomic group, and the social media, which was shaping the IYCN beliefs and attitudes. And therefore, it's very important that maternity protection should be given adequate focus. So this was a seminar that we'd organized based on our findings, and some of the suggestions which came in were very valid. I'm not going to read through all of them, but one very important thing was to make breastfeeding aspirational. The fact is that bottle feeding is aspirational for the lower socioeconomic group. Can we have a campaign to make breastfeeding aspirational? Can we support the family as a primary caregiver? Can we create awareness before pregnancy? Even during the pre-pregnancy period, during pregnancy about lactation. Knowledge about express breast milk was very, very low. So skills also were low. And that's something which can be looked at. Capacity building is important. And very interestingly, there was a recommendation of guidelines for practices during surrogacy and adoption. What are the feeding recommendations of these children? And this is a new area which I think many people should be able to contribute and develop guidelines to. We also then looked at the IYCF policies and to see who are the stakeholders. And what we really found was that most actors were from the government sector, followed by development partners or international agencies, NGOs, civil societies, and research and academia. So contrary to our belief of industry being strong players to it, we did not find it in our study. And we actually found it was the two ministries, the Ministry of Women and Child Development and the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and Bill Melinda Gates Foundation at that point of time when the study was done, which was contributing towards the funding initiatives. And both the ministries as well as the PMO's office was contributing to the technical support. And when it came to the policy content, there were a number of areas which could be strengthened. Like I said, the national policy on IYCF, but the strength was that these IYCF guidelines were integrated into many health, nutrition, and child development programs and services, both at national and state level. And another opportunity identified was the development of IYCF policy guidelines for emergencies and for tribal populations, which is lacking. Coming to the first 1,000 days, we found again a very high prevalence of hypovitaminosis D among pregnant women. And it had a direct correlation with also the vitamin D levels of the infants. Looking at factors which affected the birth weight, Besides the factors that we are always familiar with, IFA tablets, maternal education at mother, maternal, household, family, or community level, we found psychosocial health, domestic violence, relationship with the husband, depression, anxiety. These were important factors. And therefore, maybe we need to look at counseling centers or special skilled people to deal with these problems and identify these women and help them or support them. So because of this, we had a healthy and positive pregnancy initiative, again, a World Bank funded project, where we developed a package of nutrition, health education, and stress reduction. And we helped them overcome stresses through yoga, pranayam, counseling, fun and games. And we found there was an improvement in birth weight and a significant increase in access to medical care, IFA supplementation, and institutional deliveries. These were some of the modules that we had prepared for this, and it was a very well-received package. So to conclude, I would say that India is in the midst of a developmental transition with a very large young population and a fast increasing older population. Hence, recommendations for the application of the life course perspective with a focus on the emerging knowledge of nutrition science are imperative in an effort to improve not only the current maternal and child health programs, but even those affecting NCDs and older persons, nutrition policies, and service delivery. At the end, I would like to place on record my gratitude to my mentors, my seniors for their guidance, for all my co-investigators and teams of research projects who have supported me throughout, and the various funding agencies. And last but not the least, my students who have always very willingly and wholeheartedly supported me in these activities. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seema. That was a really wonderful, comprehensive talk about right from birth to elderly. Thank you very much. That was really great.
Thank you.
But due to short of time, right away we'll go to the final agenda of the program, today's program. So here we have Dr. B.K. Anand Memorial Award function. Dr. Kumud Khanna will be introducing us to the award. Dr. Sylvia will be introducing us to the recipient. And then we'll have a presentation of the award and remarks finally. So may I now request Dr. Kumud Khanna to introduce us to the award.
Yes. Very good evening to all. Dr. B.K. Anand Memorial Award was instituted by the Nutrition Society of India in association with B.K. Anand Benevolent Trust in the year 2014 in memory of Professor Balkishan Anand, an internationally renowned physiologist. Dr. Anand was born on September 18, 1917 in Lahore. All through his formative years, he was rated as an excellent student and won many scholarships, medals, and prizes. He graduated in medicine from King Edward Medical College, Lahore in 1940 and went on to do MD in 3 subjects: medicine, pathology, and physiology. He joined the Lady Hardinge Medical College as a professor of physiology at a tender age of 32 in 1949. As the first Rockefeller Foundation Fellow, he went to Yale University in 1950 and discovered the existence of a neural substrate which is responsible for regulating food intake, that is now known as the feeding center. He returned to India in 1952 and again joined the Lady Hardinge Medical College as professor and head department of physiology. Under his leadership, it became the first medical college in the country to introduce human and mammalian experiments in physiology in 1953. Then the Lady Hardinge Medical College was also recognized to start an MD course in basic medical sciences in 1955. And he also got the credit of establishing the first neurophysiology research unit at Lady Hardinge Medical College. Dr. B.K. Anand joined the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in 1956 as its first professor in the Department of Physiology. He demonstrated his dynamic leadership by helping to structure the MBBS course into 3 phases of 3 semesters each, followed by a year of internship that included 3 months of rural posting also. This pattern was quickly followed throughout the country. Dr. Anand was a member of the core team which laid down the policies and curriculum for postgraduate training in AIIMS that was soon accepted by Medical Council of India for all medical colleges in India. In 1969, he became the Dean of All India Institute of Medical Sciences. His research continued till the end of his long and distinguished scientific career by raising further questions related to the neurobiology of feeding and satiety. The neurophysiology research unit started by him at AIIMS continues to flourish even today. Besides understanding the neural basis of feeding and satiety, Dr. Anand and his team undertook studies to understand the role of limbic system in emotional and aggressive behavior, the role of hypothalamus in reproduction, as well as in cardiovascular, respiratory, and gastrointestinal activities. In 1955, Dr. B.K. Anand was instrumental in establishing the Association of Physiologists and Pharmacologists of India, which was affiliated to the International Unit of Physiological Sciences. He also started the publication of Indian Journal of Physiology and Pharmacology, that is now one of the best medical journals published in India. In 1974, he joined the Zero Office of World Health Organization in New Delhi. Working in Health Manpower Development Division in Southeast Asia, he rendered advice for policy matters relating to education, nursing, and paramedical manpower in the member countries. Joined the Family Planning Foundation in 1977 as its biomedical director and held this position till his retirement in 1982 after successfully steering research in India in biomedical sciences, especially in the development of contraceptives. After retiring from Family Planning Foundation, he took up yet another challenge of establishing a postgraduate medical institute in Srinagar at the behest of late Shri Sheikh Abdullah. During the period 1982 to 1985, he was the director of Sher-e-Kashmir Institute of Medical Sciences, Srinagar. Throughout his career, he guided many students, practitioners, researchers, and faculty, and authored over 100 research publications. Dr. Anand won numerous national and international awards and accolades. Most significant among them are the Sir Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize for Science and Technology in Medical Sciences in 1966, Padam Shri in Medicine in 1969 from Government of India, and Dr. B.C. Roy Award for Eminent Medical Man of the Year in 1984. The Nutrition Society of India is proud to announce the 7th Dr. B.K. Anand Memorial Award to Dr. K.K. Deepak from the Department of Physiology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. And now I would request Dr. Sylvia to introduce the awardee. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everybody. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. K.K. Deepak to all of you today. Dr. Deepak heads the Department of Physiology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi. Dr. Deepak obtained his MBBS degree from Gandhi Medical College, Bhopal in 81, and MD degree in 1984 and PhD in 1990 from AIIMS, New Delhi. He was awarded the DSc degree from Swami Vivekananda Yoga Anusandhana Samastha University, Bangalore. And currently he's serving as in addition to serving as the head of the department, he is also Dean Examinations at AIIMS, New Delhi. As the Dean at AIIMS, Professor Deepak bears the unenviable responsibility of ensuring smooth conduct of some of the toughest exams that decide the fate of many of our young students. Dr. Deepak played a pivotal role in establishing the Autonomic and Vascular Function Labs, a highly specialized and exclusive facility at AIIMS. He also pioneered clinical physiology and paved the way for intraoperative and neuromonitoring and gastrointestinal physiology in India. He set up a central heart rate analysis facility that provides free online software for cardiac monitoring. A firm believer in active lifestyle and balanced nutrition, he has translated his passion into work by creating a niche in the fields of yoga physiology and space physiology. He contributed significantly to the Fit India mission of Government of India by chairing committee which developed the age-appropriate fitness protocols and guidelines for India. He has served as the chief editor of Indian Journal of Physiology and Pharmacology. He pioneered research in the field of medical education and conducted workshops in medical education continuously for over 3 decades. He is an innovator who believes in disseminating skills not only in India, but also to the members of the SAARC nations through conduct of annual workshops. Dr. Deepak has delivered several invited talks in various countries, including University of Illinois College of Medicine, Peoria, Harvard Medical School, University of California, San Diego. He is a co-inventor of 3 patents pertaining to exercise and space physiology, which has been filed. His patent for pro-gravity body gear to create gravity during microgravity exposure has been published in 2018. Recently, he has served as the chair for a committee which developed various physical activity and their assessment protocols under Fit India program for Government of India. He has published 187 indexed full papers, research papers, which has more than 3,400 citations. Dr. K.K. Deepak, everybody, recipient of the 7th Dr. B.K. Anand Memorial Award. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Now, with all awards will be sent shortly, respective awardees, their address.
Thank you.
By courier. Thank you.
Thank you. I humbled.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next.
Sir, your remarks, sir.
Good evening, Yui, and thank you so much, Nutrition Society of India, for giving me this award. Dr. B.K. Anand. I spent some time with Dr. B.K. Anand in 1981 when I joined. We got his mentorship, we got his advice and guidance, and what we are because of his tree which has been planted in the Department of Physiology. So I remember so many interactions with him, and we got so much of encouragement from him. I remember one of my paper which was used by NASA. Actually, when I submitted, I got an award in Bangalore. But when it was published, it was so polished that it looked so beautiful. I was wondering, I've not written such a nice paper. What this language? Then I learned Dr. B.K. Anand actually did hand correction of that paper. He was such a nice person that he did all, some of the words that I did not understand, but he gave me such a shape. And thank you so much for the family of Dr. B.K. Anand. I know Dr. Kusum Verma and Dr. Kumud Khanna, and we have been so much lucky to have him with him during this emeritus professorship. He would always welcome, he would always come to our seminars, will advise us, and especially I was impressed with his talk of integrative physiology. He talked in the sense that it's all integrated, it's not in compartment. It's not one compartment, cardiac, heart, or brain, or this, or even nutrition you talked about. So one of the important incident I always remember. So when you would come to the coffee room, and we all as undergraduate, postgraduate would sit together, and we would to make coffee for him. So one day I was lucky to get a chance to make a coffee. We would compete with who will make coffee for Dr. B. Anand. So one day I got a chance to make coffee, and I put 1 teaspoonful of coffee. And then I said, sir, is it okay? I was wondering, is it less or more? He says, put more. I said, okay, second one, put more. I put 4. He said, I need this much coffee to make my brain work and my heart in the same position. He was such a wonderful person that he would say that I need that sympathetic stimulation to equate with you all so that I can talk to you all. So thank you, such a stalwart. And then we had an occasion to so many occasions he would attend APPI meetings, and he was we were very lucky to have him here. We always admire, we always talk to him. And if you come to my office, we have a picture of Dr. B.K. Anand always kept in our office. So this is such a stalwart. So with those words, I thank you so much again bestowing this award to me. Thank you, Madam Dr. Kumud Khanna. Thank you, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I'm
sir.
humbled.
So, thank you. Now, before moving to the last agenda of today's program, I would request Dr. Prakash to make his remarks, because briefly I could see his face trying to make some remarks. Sir, Dr. Prakash, sir, if you're there.
Hello.
Sir. No, before this award function, he was trying to make some.
He made about IVLS, no?
For the Secretary Award.
Yeah. No, after that also.
After that, okay.
Sir, if you are there already. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay, Dr. A.N. Radha. Dr. A.N. Radha, are you there? She was there.
She was there.
Please, madam.
Please, sir.
Vote of thanks.
Please give vote of thanks, madam.
Thank you very much. From the headquarters, I thank all the participants. Now, Radha madam will be giving her final vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. Thank you, Dr. Lakshmaya, for giving me a chance. Good evening to all. On this auspicious occasion of 52nd NSI Oration Meet, I am delighted to extend greetings to prominent guests, distinguished resource personnel, NSI family members, and all participants. We were just engrossed in the intellectual feast till now. At this juncture, I may sound insipid, but I am sure and certain that all votes go for one point, that is showering gratitude to the best and strongest gesture. It comes with a sweet divinity and flavor of its own. Hence, I am fortunate to get this opportunity of thanking one and all. At the outset, standing ovation and applause go to the vibrant organizing committee and to its unparalleled hard-working team leader, Dr. Hemlata, President of NSI, and her team, Dr. Dinesh Kumar, Dr. Lakshmaya, Dr. Kausalya, Dr. Ariappa, Dr. Sylvia Fernandez Rao. Also, I acknowledge the presence and contribution of Dr. Kumud Khanna. Let me add in this list NIN scientist. Let me add in this list NIN scientist and administrative staff who must have worked online, offline, and behind the screen with single focus to make the event a great success. It's well known, NIN and NSI are two sides of same coin and a very good example for symbiotic style of functioning. Very special thanks to past and the present directors for keeping up the legacy even today. Always they plan out the work and work out the plan was their culture, and it is everyone has to emulate. And this is how and why, in spite of several odds and ordeals of grim pandemic situation, they could organize a fruitful, cherishable, extensive program today. The team's initiative, intensive preparation with brainstorming sessions have reflected in selection of auspicious day while the Nutrition Month programs are going on in this country. Second, selection of topics of today's interest. Third, selection of experts to enable participants to have authentic scientific input from horse's mouth. Then this is the legacy and high standard set by our legendary stalwarts. like Dr. Gopalan, Dr. Shikrandaya, and Dr. Devdas are kept up. Time to offer prayerful gratitude to them also for the vibrations, guidance, and blessings still we are receiving and experiencing, though we miss their presence. Coming to the center of attention program, today's event, let us jointly congratulate the excellent experts and thank them all for sparing their precious moment for us. To start with, Dr. Siddharth Ramji is the recipient of the 32nd Dr. Shikandya Memorial Oration Award, and his oration was simply superb with new year valuable research input and regarding imperative role of the optimum nutrition for overall development. Enlightened everybody, and even neonates must have been motivated and enlightened to work against malnutrition. Thank you, sir, for joining us and being with us, and hope our linkage with NSI continues. Dr. Seema Puri is the recipient of the Rajamal Devdas Memorial Oration Award. Lecture was excellent. She covered all the salient points of the entire life cycle, especially about the old age and the problems. Dr. Devdas taught community nutrition and extension to our batch. She always emphasized nutrition being applied science. The knowledge gained should be for dissemination for the transformation of the community at large, and the knowledge is not for bookshelf or for ornamental. Enrolled us as nutrition members as the NSA objective are similar. We thank her always for her vision and mission. Your viewpoints, madam, too, are conforming with her intentions and thought process as well. Your studies have covered many areas and are very useful to every one of us for extension work. Thanking you once again and be guiding us ever. Dr. Deepak, Dr. K.K. Deepak, the recipient of 7th Dr. B.K. Anand Memorial Award, deserves all our appreciations for the monumental work done in his field of interest. His vast experience in a nutshell was presented to us. It was exemplary and beneficial, must be eye-opener to many, being very innovative. No doubt, physiology and nutrition sciences coexist as compatible partners. Hence, while thanking you once again, looking forward to meeting you in our coming scientific forums also. So, in chronological order, vote of thanks is the last item, the agenda and of any agenda of the program. But in scientific platform, I feel it has a different angle. That is often the great, after the great learning experience, because that is all at this moment, our brains opens up and starts counting the points gained during the program. Maybe a number of take-home messages for planning better extension activities or R&D input for newer perspectives. In normal meet, participants gather around experts for one-to-one interaction. Maybe in vibrant meet, email is the alternative for exchange of and discussion. All chapters present must have got fresh ideas to boost impactful activities. If any name missed due to time constraint, I record my apologies. At present, we are miles apart, connected only with the bright, broad smiles to celebrate 52nd meet. I hope, time being, I may say goodbye, but Hope to meet all of you in NIN soon, as it is regarded as pilgrimage for many of us. So thank you one and all. Okay.
Anurag, Ian Radha.
Thank you, Varman. Thank you, one and all.
Now the refreshment is with our own family, no? not with NIN.
Zomato se mangalo, bro. Zomato se mangalo. Zomato se mangalo.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Once again, congratulations to all the awardees.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Seema, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, NSI.
Congratulations.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.